Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the soundbite. Ben Kinsley is joining me remotely. Ben, how are you?
Well, I think we're all remote today.
I guess we are. That's right. I take that back. This could be a first, but anyway, welcome. Glad you could join us. And our special guest, it's this remote thing, the guest picture is already up, so there's no surprises. We have Senator Joe Benning who's joining us. And Senator Benning just announced that he is running for Vermont Lieutenant Governor. So I got on the phone and invited him on the show. Welcome, Senator.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And yes, for all of those who are listening, I am the main target of this afternoon's conversation.
Exactly.
The main
All
target.
the questions are directed at you, Senator.
We'll
Anyway.
just we'll Photoshop a bullseye right on the
Exactly.
the video.
We all go back a few years together, so there you go. Could we tell stories, Senator? But we won't.
You're more than welcome to.
Yeah, sure. Anyway,
I usually know how to talk my way around them anyway. So.
I know you do. I've heard you. Can you talk, speaking of which, can you talk a little bit about your background and why this is from your family, why community and volunteering was an important part of your upbringing? I liked reading that in your bio.
So I'm going to start with my grandparents because they were Franklin Delano Roosevelt Democrats. My parents, on the other hand, were Dwight D. Eisenhower Republicans. When I was very young, and I was the oldest of a series of 4 kids in my immediate family, we would go to my grandparents every Sunday for dinner. And at some point, I got to sit at the big people's table. Usually the kids all sat in the next room at a little card table. But
yes,
when I joined those conversations, it became apparent to me that each of those entities, my grandparents and my parents, although they came from different political backgrounds, they had one thing that was clearly in common. They devoted a lot of energies to their respective communities. And I really admired that in them. I wanted to become something like them. And it wasn't political. It was a discussion about we are lucky enough to be able to sit around a table with food. We have a church that we all go to that is forming our guiding beliefs. We have a community in both the church, and in my case, it was a Catholic school that was associated with the church. And I was very proud to be part of all of that. And the service to the community that was imbued in us was something that I really appreciated.
nice.
But I'll point to my mom at the end of the day. My mom, probably because I was the oldest and she needed to get one of the 4 kids out of the house as quickly as possible, started setting me up in things. And as I look back in time, I wonder, how is it that an 11-year-old ended up being a volunteer at a camp for what we then called mentally retarded. Today, I've heard various terms. I want to be politically correct. Mentally disabled, mentally challenged, whatever the terminology is. I found myself as an 11-year-old at a camp as a counselor. Now, I was a pretty big boy at that age. So inevitably, I wound up with some of the larger kids who were the campers in my charge. And I'll tell you, it taught you a lot about life. It taught me a lot about the need that people have, and you have to open your eyes to that need. And if you've got the ability, you really ought to be contributing something. I stayed in that camp for 7 consecutive summers. And I followed that up by 2 summers worth of being a camp counselor for underprivileged kids from New York City. And I owe it all to Mom. Mom pointed me in that direction. So family was the first start of how to be involved in your community. And I really value that. And this particular job that I'm looking at now, to me, really offers an opportunity to contribute in a completely different way than I've ever done before. So that's my family community story. I managed to survive through my teen years and ended up coming to Vermont. I often joke that, yeah, I was not born here, but I got here as soon as I was allowed to legally, and I've been here officially since 1975. So what is that? That's got to be 25 plus 22 years, getting up towards 50. And my philosophy has always been, I don't care where you come from. If you've managed to survive a Vermont winter and are determined to stay here, you're probably worth something, and we'll consider you to be a citizen.
Very
I like
nice.
that definition of Vermonter. If you've
Yeah,
survived the Vermont
survive a
winter
winter.
and you want to come back for more.
Now, I would recommend people look up your bio on the website. Very impressive. And we will not go through the list of things you're involved in now. My God, that
I
and
will tell you
working.
that my website is in the middle of being reconstructed.
is it?
If you go there right now, you'll learn an awful lot about me, more than you'll ever want to know.
Well, I thought it was great, and I am jealous. It took me the first day I sat at the big table instead of in the back room at the little table. I couldn't even eat. I was like so in awe that I made it finally after all these years.
I'll tell you what, we've flipped now. Now the parents are at the small table and the kids are at the big table.
We never got there. My dad would, no.
We flipped the tables.
Wow.
So Senator, we'll pull the target back out. Why did you decide to throw your hat in the ring to run for lieutenant governor? This is obviously a different role than your role in the Senate, and it's statewide. I believe this is your first statewide run for office. What prompted you to do that, and what do you feel? Why did you feel the need to do that and take that step? And what do you think you bring to the table as a candidate?
A lot to unpack there, Ben, but let me try to start. The first spark was the idea that we have, in the middle of COVID, a Senate that is meeting remotely. We're going to have to get back together at some point in time. And when we do, we're going to have a new lieutenant governor, no matter whether it's me or somebody else. But the position itself really is in need of institutional knowledge at this point in time, especially with COVID. You may know or not know what the details of the job are. So I'd like to start by letting you know what the job actually is, because I see a lot of candidates who are out there talking about X, Y, and Z issues that they want to advance and they want to pontificate about. But the reality is, this particular job does not enable you to do any of that. It is not a place where you can draft legislation. It is not a place where you can debate in committee on legislation. It is not a place where you can vote on legislation unless there's a tie in the Senate, at which point you do have that vote. But that's a rare occurrence. The job essentially starts off with being a moderator, just like a town moderator. You are running a meeting. Do you have the skills necessary to do that? Well, I've served 10 years as Linden Town moderator. I know how to run a meeting. I've served before that as the chair of the Human Rights Commission. I've served on several boards in which I've chaired, the Linden State College Foundation, the Lindenville Rotary Club. I know how to run a meeting and to make it get from point A to point Z and get through with some semblance of sanity. So I'm not approaching the job as somebody coming in with an idealistic look at what they want to advance. I'm coming in with the meat and potatoes skills necessary to run the meeting. Secondly, this particular position in the Senate is one of 3 individuals who consist of what's known as the Committee on Committees.
Oh, right.
The Committee on Committees is the organization in the Senate that appoints every senator to be either a chair or a member of a given committee. Now, why is that important? Well, you have to know what the committees are to start with. You have to know what the players are you're talking to and about. And thus far, I haven't heard any other candidate coming in yet that is actually possessed with that internal knowledge. Who are the players? How do they fit together? I've been working with this group for 12 years now, so I think I've got a pretty good handle on who they are and how they fit together. Lastly, probably the most important part of the job, but hopefully it will never happen, is the fact that if the governor, for whatever reason, cannot fulfill his role, I would be expected to step into that plate. And I know the governor's team. I know his campaign team. I know his administration. We have worked together through the past 12 years. I served as minority leader, so I was on at least a weekly meeting basis with the governor and his team. I've campaigned with the governor, so I know the people who've been out there beating the bushes for him. And so from a transition standpoint, I think I bring a pretty good level of expertise into that role. Those are basically the three roles of what a lieutenant governor functionally does. There's another component to it, however, and that is being someone who promotes Vermont. I am really fired up about Vermont. I am a very positive individual when I talk about Vermont. I hear a lot of candidates who say this is terrible and there's people moving out and we're just every possible drawback you can think of becomes part of their vernacular. I'm not going there. I am a firm believer in the people of the state. I love the state's history. I live and breathe the state's constitution. And if I can sell those things at either a local, a state, a national, or world audience, I will be out there trying to beat that band. Pat's somewhat familiar with something that I did that I'm very proud of. And it sounds kind of small when you think about it, but if you understood the work that went into it, it's a classic example of the kind of thing that I would want to be doing in this role. And I'm talking about, of course, a simple green and gold roadside historical marker that marks the Cedar Creek battlefield in Middletown, Virginia. You don't put a Vermont monument in another state without a heck of a lot of work to make that happen.
Yeah.
And especially if it's talking about Vermont troops in the Civil War and you're planting it on soil that was once part of the Confederacy. There's a lot of diplomacy that goes on there. So my work in getting that monument installed is one of my proudest achievements. And it sounds by itself like small potatoes because most Vermonters will never see it. But every Vermonter going down the western side of the state of Virginia is making a point to stop there and send me a picture of them standing below the sign just to prove that yet there's no bullet holes in it. So I'm really happy that we've managed to accomplish that. But that's a salesmanship technique. And being somebody who can promote Vermont in that way is something I feel I would be really good at. I don't want to run against anybody else in this campaign, whether it's in the primary or it's in the general election. I want to run for Joe Benning as somebody who is willing to promote the state. And that comes not just with historical situations. You're talking about an economy. We actually have a really good economy here in Vermont. I know there's a lot of drawbacks to it, challenges that have to be met, but the bottom line is we have a Vermont brand that can be sold virtually any place. My next door neighbor runs what's called Happy Hill Farms. We live on a road called Happy Hill, of all things. Well, he came to me one day and he said, you got a lot of maple trees up there and I'm down at the bottom of the hill. You're on the top of the hill. I'd like to be able to tap into your trees. I said, Carl, go right ahead. All I want from you is I want some maple syrup every year as a rent. And he agreed. Now he is down, as we speak, he is down in Florida right now at a booth at a local community fair, and he is selling Happy Hill maple syrup made in Vermont. Nice big sign. That's the kind of thing that gets me really fired up. I have the ability to actually speak about that wherever I go, and I do. And so to me, the lieutenant governor's position just offers an opportunity to do that in ways I've never been able to do before.
That's amazing. May I say, Senator, you were I was in tears down in Cedar Creek. There were about 60 of us there, I think. And it was the most emotional. And when the troops presented themselves to Senator Benning, and they all stay in character the whole day, you can't hear any of them out of character talking about going to get pizza and a beer later. They're whatever part they're playing, and it was amazing. I have a lot of pictures in case you want to use them for your campaign. I'll send them to you.
Well, just so you know, my website happens to have a picture of you taking a picture of us all standing beneath the sign. So for
cool.
whatever that's worth, you now have a reason to go to visit my website.
I did anyway, but I missed that. How could I miss a picture of me? My God. But anyway, so and one other thing you must remember, it's part-time.
It is
I think people
part-time.
need to know that because
Well, you're paid part-time.
You're paid part-time.
You are paid part-time. But
You'll
let
be
me
working.
say that as I'm winding down my legal career, that's what I do for a living. I'm actually a trial lawyer by trade. But I've been slowly winding down. 2 more years, I'll have 40 years in. And there's only so many criminal cases and divorce cases you can do before you decide there's got to be something more to life.
Exactly.
So while this may be a part-time position, frankly, the legislature is supposed to be a part-time position.
Yeah.
I'm putting in way more hours in the legislative role right now than I am in my legal role, and I'm working full-time in my legal role. So it is what you make of it, and my intention would be to make of it not just a full-time job, but an obsession, because I love this state that much, and I really want to promote it.
Do you have, I know Phil Scott did it, Governor Scott and others before him, when they were lieutenant, took that job and did something with it to promote Vermont, to get out and as you said, just get the word out about Vermont. Do you have any ideas about that other part-time, what you might do, or just do your thing? You can ride motorcycles around Vermont.
Well, I don't want to tip my hat about what my campaign season's going to look like.
Oh, cool.
But let's just say that you may be seeing me on the road quite
Excellent.
a bit. I'm actually going to set myself up with the 251 Club and make a point about going everywhere in the state. I've already decided I'm not going out of New England this next riding season. And I need to be seen. That's one of my biggest obstacles, is I don't have the statewide name recognition.
Right.
I mean, I'm fairly well known in the kingdom because I've been here long enough and done enough here. But the only other place I have any kind of name recognition is in Bennington County, only because my name is Benning. And that's it. They don't know who I am. And I need to get out and meet people, especially in places that are not traditionally Republican. People have to know who I am and get to know me and not fear me, which is one of the obstacles my party happens to have right now, is too many of us are cast into a place where we're feared or we're mistrusted. And I've run into that even in my local county, where people say, I would never vote for a Republican because of X, Y, and Z. I have to be able to change that. I'm not entitled to this position. I have to work hard to gain people's trust. And every obstacle that's presented in that, I have to overcome somehow. So don't be surprised if you see me out on the road. Feel free to stop by and have a chat anytime that happens. As far as your question about me coming up with some kind of a game plan, should I get the job? I'm still trying to figure out how to make that something that is a concrete plan. I've seen Phil Scott's situation when he was lieutenant governor.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just point out one funny coincidence. When Phil Scott decided to run for lieutenant governor, one of his first things to do was to appear at Wilkins Harley-Davidson and be a judge at the annual chili cook-off.
Yes.
Well, the annual chili cook-off at Wilkins Harley-Davidson is the day after tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And I will be one of the judges at that event. So I'm just following the footsteps of somebody before me, and everything that he did successfully, I'll try to do myself.
I'll give you a little campaign tip that that Phil Scott did very well in his lieutenant governor race. I remember I was working on another campaign, a statewide campaign, that the first year that Phil Scott ran for lieutenant governor. And I just so happened that I was in the group that was right in front of his in the campaign route in Lyndonville. And and he had a race car in the parade. And you know, they're revving the race car in the parade and everyone's cheering, and it's like, we can't compete with that. Bring a race car to a parade. You're going to be.
Yes, I actually was there, Ben. That's called the Stars and Stripes Festival.
Yep.
And I was a 20-year member of the board of the Stars and Stripes Committee. My job originally was to line up the politicians in that parade. This was long before I became a politician. And I often joke that I'd often put the politicians right behind the Canadian horses that were coming down.
Nice.
But I was there, and usually when I'm in that parade, and every other parade I've done for the past 12 years, I have a little red sports car, and that little red sports car became my signature. Not this time. Pat hit the nail on the head. You're going to see a totally different signature when I'm out there, and you'll just have to wait
A
and see.
real Vermonter, and I know. There you go. Hey,
Well,
guess who?
hopefully it's as good as the race car, because that's hard to compete with.
Well, it will be. Well, David Zuckerman had a tractor.
Well, that's
Yeah.
true.
And
That was
carrots.
his signature.
A lot of carrots
A lot of carrots.
from his farm. I just have to mention who was the campaign manager for his first run at lieutenant governor. Just saying.
Did you have something to do with that
I
race
seem
car?
to recall somebody on the
did.
screen actually that was.
Yeah, I
there.
did. We were walking, and there was a parade, and I think it was this one, where it was so hot they were wetting us with hoses.
Yep.
It was a godsend. Every time we'd be running back and forth to get wet with the hoses, because it was hotter than blazes. Welcome to politics, Senator. You'll
There
be
you go. Preview.
he'll be
Preview.
riding. That's good. Anyway, moving
something
on.
you touched on that I just want that I do want to expand upon. So this concept of that actually was brought about by Howard Dean of all people, of the lieutenant governor being more than just the bureaucratic caretaker of the Senate, right? This what I kind of like to say is the friendly pulpit. Role that the lieutenant governor sort of is expected to have now, to go to ribbon cuttings and talk about Vermont and promote Vermont and our values and that sort of thing, outside of the managerial duties of the position. So I'm kind of curious, like it sounds like your approach is more of the legislative leader sort of role is how you're looking at it, with these extra, ability to promote Vermont as a secondary role. Is that an accurate portrayal?
I don't think it's quite accurate. My legislative history and my abilities and skills that have been developed over time running meetings are certainly an important component of this job. Knowing the players is a very important part of this job and how they fit together. But primarily, I see this as an ability to promote Vermont. That's, if I had 3 words, well, let's make it 4. I want to promote Vermont. That is part and parcel of why I'm excited about this position. In describing what went on in Virginia, I'm talking about any piece of legislation that I have done over my legislative career. It's primarily to advance some cause in Vermont. But I want people to know up front, if you're asking me to advance a piece of legislation, it's just not possible in this position. My role and what I want to see myself expanding upon is the ability to stand up and promote everything I can about Vermont, from its economy to its history to its constitution to the civility that the people have that live here, and the integrity that we all bring to our work every day. That to me is probably the most important part of this role that I would be partaking in.
And we haven't had someone like that, I don't think, at least in a while, that is so enthusiastic and supportive of Vermont. So thank you for that. You mentioned some bills and being in the legislature for quite a while. I think in one of the questions that we had asked is, what do you think after all these years are your 5 top achievements, or however many you'd like to list?
Well, I could come up with 7 off the top of my head,
There you
and
go.
I'll start with the very first bill I signed on to. Vermont did not have an expungement process when I came to the legislature. I met with the chair of judiciary, who is still Dick Sears, and I described what I understood expungement to be about, that numerous other states had this process. But Vermonters who are now grandparents and had made some stupid mistake when they were in their late teens were
Mhm.
being prevented from going on their grandchildren's school trips and chaperoning because they had this conviction on their record. And if they had a conviction on their record that was something we were treating as a non-crime, and I'll use possession of marijuana as the classic example, um, to be refusing those people in their 80s the ability to chaperone their grandchildren's school trip was just stupid. They had long ago paid their debt to society. So states around the country had developed a system called expungement, which would enable them to have a clean record. I'm not talking about felonies or violent crimes or anything of that nature. I'm talking about a simple list of crimes that you would be able to get to in front of a judge and say, you know, Judge, I paid this debt a long time ago. I have lived an honorable and good life. I would like to be able to be considered a real citizen. And so we developed an expungement process for Vermont. Now,
Mm.
as of 2 Fridays ago, there were 24,488 Vermonters who had an expungement taken care of. Now, to me, that's not small potatoes. That's a
Mhm.
lot of Vermonters who have been able to clean up their records. And it opens doors for a lot of people. You have, not just in the chaperone case I'm talking about, some people were prevented from going to Canada. You know, in my neck of the woods, Canada is 25 miles up the road. And we often go up there for, they've got great food, they speak a wonderful language, and they are part and parcel of Vermont's economy. And so, why are we denying people the ability to go back and forth across the border because of something that they did 40, 50 years ago? So, I look at that bill, my very first one that I signed on to, as one of my most important accomplishments in the legislature. I'll talk about more recently the Capitol bill. My committee, I chair Senate institutions, and we are responsible for passage of a bill that has $124 million roughly in funding for all of the state's brick and mortar. That ranges from our corrections systems to our mental health systems, our state parks, forest and recreation, you name it, anything the state owns, it's coming through that bill. Shepherding that bill through the process, making sure we have all things covered as well as we possibly can with that limited budget, is also something I'm very proud of. It is not an easy process to get all the requests that people are asking for and narrow it down into something that everybody can at least hopefully live with, and keep it within a reasonable budget that is not breaking the bank for the state. And we have worked very successfully in doing that, and I'm very proud of that. I can talk about a lot more. I don't know how much time you have. Pat, you and I,
Oh,
when we held one of these conversations a long time ago, I think it would be fair to say that you were surprised I was bringing a legalization of marijuana.
yes, I
Um,
was, Senator, but I've changed my mind recently.
well, let me just say that I knew way back then that the sky was not going to fall if we went in the direction of legalization. The other part of that problem is we had real substantial evidence of the number of Vermonters who were consuming. And I was not and am not one of them. But when I looked at people being arrested, people being hit with criminal records, and in some cases, in my early days of my legal career, people being jailed for simple possession charges, none of that made any sense. If you look at Vermont history is libertarian to the core. And when people are consuming something and not harming somebody else in that process, it made no sense to me that we were in a state that was literally still in the 1960s, in a war on drugs that was never successful in the way that it was intended. But we were spending an awful lot of money trying to win that war. There are all kinds of reasons why that process to me was wrong. And it also stems from a situation that I was in high school where I happened to be in a rock and roll band And we were practicing at a house that got raided. And in an upstairs bedroom, the police found a couple of empty hashish pipes. And I mean this sincerely. There was nobody consuming at the moment in time that we were actually busted. But that bust led to me eventually going through law school, sitting down to fill out an application for the bar exam, and finding a question on there, have you ever been arrested? Um, I had gone through getting a citation to appear in court, but when we got to court, the prosecutor came out and said, we don't have the evidence back from the lab yet. If the owner of the house takes a $50 fine, we'll dismiss the charges against everybody else. And I literally went down with my parents to the police station where the chief of police tore up the file that he had on me, having been arrested. So, I don't know, 10 years or so later, whatever it was, I'm sitting filling out this application. It says, have you ever been arrested? Well, the last words out of that chief's mouth were, as far as we're concerned, this never happened. And I'm about to answer that question on the application and say no, which technically would not have been true. Luckily, I paused. I went back to that police station, and lo and behold, there is a file with my face in a mugshot and my fingerprints on file.
Mm.
That's where I learned about the expungement process, because I literally went through getting an expungement, and by law in that state, you are then entitled, once you get that expungement, to say, no, I've never been arrested or convicted or anything else. But I explained all that when I filled out the rest of the application for the bar exam. So they at least knew my story. And it's one of those things that led me to do a lot, including going through law school and eventually ending up thinking about politics. One of those great life events. But we're talking about other things I may have accomplished in the legislature. You may have seen that I am now the lead sponsor on the tax and regulated system. I've been around a lot of states, and I have seen how they are operating a taxed and regulated system. I advanced that cause because I literally do not want kids buying stuff out of the back of cars. A taxed and regulated system has actually been going on in Vermont for a while with medical marijuana. Most people don't know, right in downtown Montpelier, there is a fairly large building with a heck of a lot of marijuana growing in it. I'm not going to tell you where that is because I don't want them to be in trouble, but the nutshell is it's been going on for some time just in a medical marijuana scenario. So I've been in places like Alaska, for instance. If you've ever been to the small town of Talkeetna, Alaska, it's where most people fly out to do a trip around Denali. But the upshot is right in the middle of town is a very well done, state-of-the-art retail marijuana store. And it is akin to a high-end wine store. You cannot get in through the front door before passing two different guards who ask people who even look like me for my driver's license. They test everybody walking in to make sure they're of age. When you get in, you are presented with a group of people behind the counter who know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly how to explain how to consume this product, what not to do, what you might be violating if you do X, Y, or Z. And no kid is going to get in the door. Every adult that does is going to have an adequate education before they walk back out of the door. And everything that they buy has been tested in a laboratory to make sure it's safe. I go back to the point that there are an awful lot of Vermonters out there consuming this product. I think it is only right and appropriate that they are entitled to buy it in a place where they know they're buying a safe product, they're getting a proper education, and we have the ability to collect a profit from that the state can use to battle other things that are more important, like our opioid crisis. And getting the public at large past the idea of this retail environment is promoting the opioid crisis, that's still a bit of a challenge. There are too many people who have got that connected in a way that it's not the right connection to make. And I think it's part of my responsibility to try to educate people as much as I can. Other things I've done, geez. If you are a woman who has what is known medically as dense breast tissue, and you go through a mammogram, you may not, as a result of the status of your dense tissue, be picking up cancer. And as a result, women were missing an actual cancer diagnosis because the mammogram was not picking it
Wow.
up. There is now a piece of legislation that requires doctors to determine whether the dense breast tissue is interfering with the mammogram, and if so, they are instructed to send you somewhere else to have that checked out. It's not only women that get breast cancer. I know men get it, but it's most common that women have this situation. I guess one of the most fun things I've done is a Latin motto.
Ah, yes, I remember this.
I have to go back and say Vermont did not have a Latin motto when an 8th grade girl walked into my office and said that she's in a Latin class at her school. Her Latin class was talking about the fact that many states have a Latin motto in addition to their English motto. And why doesn't Vermont? I said, I don't have the foggiest idea. Now, honestly, in the back of my head, I thought, this isn't going anywhere. But if I introduce a bill, this young lady and her classmates will get a really good education on coming to the State House, learning how a bill gets introduced, how to get in front of a committee. The committee will probably vote it down. And, okay, she tried. She got an experience of what legislating is all about. To me, that was the most important part of the project. As it happens, the Senate Government Operations Committee, who got the bill, they liked it. So they voted for it, which meant it was on its way out to the floor. Now, I took the young lady aside, frankly, as we were leaving the door of the committee room. She's all happy. I'm like, what the heck just happened here? But she's excited, and I'm excited. I ran into a Channel 3 news reporter. It must have been a slow news day. He said, Benning, why do we need a Latin motto? And I explained to him, well, this girl came to me. She had done her homework, first off, in looking for a Latin motto. She knew Vermont was a republic at one point in time, and that when we were a republic for 14 years, we were trying to become the 14th state. And during that time period, a guy down in Rupert was minting coins for the republic. His name was Harmon, and he was producing a coin called the Harmon cent. And on the back of that coin was a Latin phrase, Stella Quarta Decima. It stood for the 14th state because we were trying to become the 14th state. She added the word fulgiat to the end of that and proposed the Latin motto, Stella Quarta Decima Fulgiat, which stands for, may the 14th star shine bright.
Nice.
So she had done her homework. My mentor in getting to the legislature was a guy named Graham Newell, who was not only one of the nation's best Latin teachers, he was also one of the state's authorities on Vermont history. And I gobbled up everything he taught me on Vermont history. He was dead now, but I knew he'd be smiling down, looking at this whole project, thinking, what a great thing. But when Channel 3 put that story on its Facebook page, the comments that followed exposed an underbelly of bigotry and ignorance I never expected to see happen. And when I saw that, I mean, there were comments like, send Benning and Obama back to Mexico where they belong. We don't need to get rid of our English motto, and who needs this Mexican stuff? It was awful. And so I sat down with the girl and her family, And I said, I want to make sure you're comfortable continuing here, given that what she was seeing, obviously, and all of her classmates. And I said, I'm going to turn this into something positive, and we're going to work really hard to get this bill passed. So I went to the caucuses on both sides of the building, the Democrats as well as the Republicans. And I explained this entire story to all of them. We ended up passing that bill through the House unanimously. I think there were 2 votes against it in the Senate. The nutshell was it passed with flying colors. And then we got to UVM for what's called Latin Day. And there were over 600 kids and their families in there for Latin Day. It's a very popular thing for anybody who has taught Latin in school these days. The governor came to sign the bill in front of all of those folks. Now, I tell this long story for one reason. Long after I'm gone, some school kid somewhere is going to be asked to do research on Vermont's English and Latin mottos. I hope that young lady who walked into my office is still alive and feeling really good about what happened. And I'll just be happy up there in heaven, where, of course, I know I'm going.
Yeah, well, we don't know yet, but that
So
is an amazing story.
You've heard a long story there, but that's the idea behind this lieutenant governor's position. Any chance that I get to promote a positive image for Vermont, it is a priceless opportunity if I could fill that role.
That'll do it. That's a great story.
That is a great story. I knew part of it, but I did not know the whole thing.
What's really sad, and it comes out every once in a while on Facebook and stuff, is, as you were talking about, the bigotry. And I love this state too, and I get so surprised when I read it or I see it or I hear it. I'm like, what is this? It's just shocking. It's just that it's so deep that some people are really knee deep in those feelings, and just surprises me. And sometimes it surprises me who said it.
I have to say the most difficult part of that for me was to deal with the girl directly.
Yeah.
And she's witnessing all this. So not only is she getting an education about the legislative process, she's getting a cram course on how people can just be so stupid.
Yep.
And to try to walk her through that. And I'm very proud of her that she held up and said, yeah, let's do it.
She should have been congratulated for doing what she did. I mean, amazing at her age.
Well, I'm happy to say that everybody that met her in the legislature, including Governor Shumlin, was bending over backwards to congratulate her at the time.
Well, as much as those messages are really stick with it, fortunately, I'm sincerely hoping it's a very small majority. It's a small number in this state, because we are good. I'm counting myself, but Vermonters are good people.
I believe so. That's why I'm running for this position.
So this story really kind of ties nicely back into the platform you're running on for lieutenant governor. And it sounds like, and this does make sense, although we often don't hear it articulated this way, that you're not necessarily running on a platform of issues, because you can't advance individual issues as lieutenant governor. But what you can do is be a cheerleader for Vermont and our values and our identity as a state. Is that, can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I'm working with a web designer right now who's trying to develop a page, and he says, you got to have a platform out there. And I keep coming back to this. It's a one-line platform. I want to promote Vermont, and I do it in every way, shape, or form I can think of, because that is the role I see outside of all the mechanical functions that this role happens to be. This is a podium for launching Vermont's cause. And that can happen virtually anywhere, whether you're cutting a ribbon at the local mom and pop store that just opened up, or you're out of state at some function where you've got a display of Vermont products, or Vermont colleges that are trying to advance their causes. This position offers that opportunity. We were talking earlier about Cedar Creek. I loved the ability to say I was the highest ranking Vermont representative there that day. But I was also very sad about that. I shouldn't have been.
Mhm.
We should have had somebody from our federal delegation, from either the governor or the lieutenant governor's position, and they were all specifically invited by me, and none of them showed up. I can't stand that. And if I'm given this opportunity to fulfill this role, there is no possible way I would avoid something like that. I would be there even if it was my own expense. But I really love that ability to be positive and promote us as opposed to pick on us for whatever
Well,
reason.
especially Cedar Creek is like our shining moment in the Civil War. It's
One of
where,
them.
huh?
One of them for sure.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, it's really that didn't pick its charge, but Cedar Creek was sort of it for us, a defining moment for Vermonters. I
What was the phrase from that? Find the Vermonters and follow them, right?
yes,
Something along those lines.
Vermonters up front.
yeah,
Vermonters up
right.
front.
Well, because you're right on the battlefield. It's not like any of the other battlefields that are filled with monuments and stuff. But this is the Cedar Creek is the battlefield.
Yeah.
They are reenacting right where it happened.
You should know that the reason why the Cedar Creek room at the State House has that 10 by 30-foot piece of canvas
Right.
displaying this battle is because the veterans after the Civil War got together and said, we want to do a memorial to what we did here. Which battle should we choose? And the
Yep.
reason they chose Cedar Creek was because there were more regiments from Vermont at that battle than any other battle in the Civil War. There are other places where Vermonters did a lot of good, Gettysburg being one of them. But the bottom line was they had more regiments from around the state at this one particular battle than any other battle in the
And the
war.
paintings are of real people, are of real soldiers in that picture, in the painting. Those are real Vermont soldiers in that painting.
And the landscape is also the landscape of the battlefield. That's the
Yes.
Massanutten Mountain Range. If you go in and look at the battle scene, the
Yep.
Massanutten Mountain Range is in the background.
That's
Julian
amazing.
Scott, the painter, got the little carte de visits. There was little photographs of the individual soldiers who were in the battle, and he literally painted them into the battle scene. There's a great story about one of them. I don't know what kind of time you got here, but if you're editing
We're
this,
running out.
Not
We only have
enough,
a few minutes.
unfortunately.
okay, well, there's a great story about one of them in the dead center of the painting. And his story is now told at Cedar Creek on a little sandwich board below the green and gold roadside
Right.
marker.
Right.
He was wounded. He was put in a house for protection. And as you read that story on the battlefield proper, you can look up and see the house that he was put in for protection as the battle raged all
Yeah.
around him.
Amazing. Just amazing. I think we have run out of time, have we not, Ben?
Yes, I think we are at time
We're
more
at
or
time.
less. I think do you have any closing remarks, things that we should let our listeners know about you and your campaign and what your next steps are here?
Well, when we started out, Ben, you observed that this was my first statewide race. I cannot imagine anything more scary from where I'm sitting right now because I've never attempted anything this big. And it is safe to say I probably don't have the foggiest idea of what I'm doing, but I'm going to have a real fun time doing it. And I want to keep it positive throughout the rest of this campaign. So I don't care whether I'm in the primary or the general or who the person is on the other side. I'm going to do my very best not to run against somebody, but to run on behalf of the skills that I bring to the table and the attitude that I bring about wanting to promote Vermont. And I guess I can leave it at that.
That's great. Senator, thank you so much for joining us, and we really wish you a lot of luck. You got a few miles to put on that motorcycle of yours. So we will see you on the trail. Ben, thanks for joining us. Thank you all for listening in, and check out the Senator's website. We'll see you next week. And in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.